Hello and welcome to another edition of On the Line, Perspectives on Partition. I'm Paul McFadden, and throughout this series, which is the idea of the Bloody Sunday Trust, I've been talking to people from a variety of backgrounds about one of the main events in modern Irish history, the partition of the island 100 years ago this year. It's, of course, a key event in British history as well, and it has begun in recent years to impinge on modern day affairs in the European Union as well. Our guest today is an author, a campaigner, a former IRA prisoner, and significantly in the context of this series, he's chairperson of the Bloody Sunday Trust. Tony Doherty, you're very welcome to the series. Thanks for agreeing to talk to us about this. Just as the trust chairperson, I'm intrigued to know why the trust would regard, given its own origins, I mean, this seismic event in Irish history, which occurred 50 years ago next year, why the trust had decided that something that happened 100 years ago, this act of partition, was worthy of the kind of attention which this series is devoting to it.
Well, I suppose it's not insignificant that Bloody Sunday happened almost exactly 50 years after partition, and the trust itself was set up with specific objectives and also broad, and the specific ones were around assisting the families bring about their own specific objectives and so on, and the trust have done that very well over the years. So it's that sort of supportive role. But there's also that looking at the broader manifestations of politics and human rights and political development here in Derry, throughout the north and throughout the island. So we decided that political discourse is something that we've always been good at, and that we decided for a number of reasons to concentrate specifically on the issue of partition, explored from a range of perspectives, and hopefully move it on and expedite matters and clarify how good, bad, or indifferent opposition support and lay in between is, and hopefully move it to a better place. As simple as that.
When you say expedite it, as an Irish Republican, you wanted to expedite it to the point where there is no border, of course, on the island.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, the border has all but gone anyway as a physical manifestation, I suppose, of political division. Particularly since the Good Friday Agreement, and then it has obviously arisen in more recent times with Brexit and the sea border and all of that. So it partition has been an ongoing sort of scar, if you want, on the map of the island, and a physical division between the people as well. So it is important, and I did use the word expedite deliberately, because I think we are sort of moving in that direction demographically. I think that there's a general sort of thrust, sort of looks like an unstoppable train in a sense towards a new political manifestation of democracy on the island. What that actually looks like, I'll be happy enough to explore with you during the course of this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'll be intrigued to find out how you think it might look. In fact, but I just was there ever a point during all of the political toing and froing over Brexit when you thought, as an Irish Republican, I mean, you're saying that nowadays, to all intents and purposes, the border has basically disappeared. Was there ever a point that you thought that it might have returned in some hard form along that line which separates Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland? Did you ever fear that might return?
No, I didn't ever think it was a distinct reality or possible reality or outcome of any of that sort of messy sort of in between of Brexit. I think that the international focus on Ireland, through the European Union, even on from the dealing with the Brexit issue itself and from the US, I was very, very confident that there would never be a hard border on the island again. Obviously, some people had pushed for it unsuccessfully. I have to say this, and it doesn't give me any pleasure particularly to say it, but I think political unionism has made an absolute mess of their own political desires, or stemming from their own political desires. They have ended up in a literally shooting themselves in the foot and then blaming somebody else for pulling the trigger.
With a reference to Brexit, presumably.
Oh, absolutely, in reference to the Brexit. I suppose, you know, we're now in where we are 100 years on from partition, and if you even look at the events of this week, where Edmund Poots has now stood down after a short number of weeks at the helm of the DUP. There is a sense, I think it's palpable enough, that this is like it's like an end game for unionism in a sense. It doesn't give me any pleasure to say it, and I'll maybe elaborate on that.
Well, do that now, Tony, if you don't mind. Why
that's fine.
Why would not give you, you know, why is that not cause for some satisfaction, a smidgen of satisfaction, even with someone who has devoted much of his adult life to removing the border? Why do you not take, you know, a great kind of, I mean, you use the word schadenfreude. I mean, why not take great pleasure from the discomfort of unionists at present?
Because it probably has to end up in a national and international scenario again. You know, in terms of the moving on from the Good Friday Agreement, I think that the demographics of the island, particularly the north, have gone against the founders of the state and the causes as the way that the state was founded in the first place. I think there's no political confidence among unionism, but we are going to come on to a new dispensation. I think, as an example, nobody in you know of my mindset in the 1970s or 80s would have thought that the conflict would have ended with an accommodation called the Good Friday Agreement. Would have been impossible to see at the time. And now that we're 25 years on from that, with Brexit, we have a new demography, and the population in the north just won't maintain the status quo anymore in terms of the union with Britain. So I think that what is required here is a bit of forward and creative thinking about what the political entity of Ireland may look like. As an example, right, I think it is recognised that, you know, within the Good Friday Agreement, that if you want, that Britain is a guarantor because of their status and because of the union, they're a guarantor for the unionist population in the north, and they, you know, in theory, for us as well, but it doesn't really work out like that. Our guarantor in terms of the new dispensation is the Irish government, right? So I think what we will find, given that we are moving steadily, I think, towards the realization of a new political sort of entity on the island, I think that the rights of people to be British need to be copper fastened in any new discussions, negotiations, outcomes, and agreements. I think that is an absolute given. I do also think that that Britain, in a sense, needs to be conferred the status of somehow still guaranteeing its role in a new Ireland on behalf of Northern Unionism and anybody else who wants it. Now, this might be coming across a bit sort of a bit confused, but we do have a huge unionist minority on the island, right?
Yeah.
And that has to be taken care of, accommodated, their outcomes achieved to some extent, so that in the new arrangement, I think Britain may well have a role in Ireland for 25 years past any new political agreement, and that may be a like a convention, that it may be some like a staged approach to Irish unity. I think any agreement around a unified state would need to guarantee rights, cultural rights across the board. I think it actually needs to be a rights-based constitution, a rights-based polity. I think anything less, we will never be forgiven for. And I do think that I think we're reasonably well advanced now in terms of the respect for human rights and the need for human rights, to ensure that all of that is ingrained within any new constitutional arrangement. But I do think the Northern Unionists and possibly ours who aren't will need their cultural and political rights guaranteed to some extent, to a large extent, within any new constitution. I think that's where we're going. I mean, when we were growing up, we talked about a united Ireland, yes, that a united Ireland this way or that way, and they actually coined John Hume's phrase, "It's united Ireland or nothing." But I think there just needs to be greater creativity used now in terms of how we actually encourage, facilitate, persuade unionism that their future, or at least a significant section of it, that their future lies within a new egalitarian, pluralist Ireland. Interestingly, I think, you know, in the doing of that, when you look at the political map of the island in terms of left-right politics, you will find that the Northern Unionists will have more in common with Fine Gael in the south. And what you could find, ironically, and it wouldn't be to my satisfaction at all, that the left-right split could well fall on the right in terms of the political majority, although there is obviously a significant left-wing sort of rump of politics as well. But you never know how these things work out.
The idea of unionists lining up alongside Fine Gael at the moment, given some of the things that have been said about Leo Varadkar and Simon Coveney recently by unionists, would probably come as a surprise to them. But I know that in politics you just can't judge it on the moment. You know, I mean,
absolutely. What I was going to add to that, actually, I think that there is, I think in the south of the country, we're actually dealing with two generations since the doing away of Section 31. And I think all of that stuff that was literally shoveled onto the carpet by governments and RT and so on, with regard to the status of the North, the history of the North, the goings-ons of the North, the role of the British state in the North, I think all that has exploded onto the scene south of the border. We're used to it. I mean, we grew up with all the stuff, Bloody Sunday, collusion, massacres here and there, the IRA offensive against the British, you know, which was far from perfect. And, you know, I think there were also atrocities carried out on the Republican side, don't get me wrong. But I think all that history, I think, is being sort of discovered by two generations of younger people, younger than us, throughout the country. I think that is actually resulting in a whole new mindset about what the island is, where it's going in terms of its future. And so you couldn't have had this debate, I think, in the 1990s. Certainly not with any great degree of confidence, given that the political sort of layout in the south. But I think it's all up for grabs now. It's a time of great flux.
A number of things you said there, which sort of lead me into other areas, which I will pick up for you. Just want to go back. You mentioned the John Hume a quote which actually was uttered in the aftermath of Bloody Sunday. And he said,
Yeah.
what actually said was overlooking on the walls, overlooking the box side. And he said, for many people down there now, it's United Ireland or nothing. And I'm kind of thinking back to that time, because at that point, for many people, and maybe you as a young man, Tony, I mean yourself, the mantra, the slogan was Brits out.
Yeah.
From the way you're talking now, it might kind of still be Brits out, but it's Brits out, but maybe not just yet. And maybe it's for a longer haul even than you envisage it, beyond a quarter of a century past any kind of new settlement.
Well, I mean, political slogans are, they are what they are. They serve a, I mean, Brits out serves a particular purpose, but it was also interestingly reinterpreted or interpreted by unionists as meaning that they will have to go as well. And I'm sure that was never the intention, but you don't always get what you intend to do. But I do think that that Britain will have a role in Ireland well past the removal of partition, and well past any new agreements that lead to a new constitutional arrangement on the island. God knows what that would look like. It could be a federated outcomes. You just wouldn't know. But I mean, in much the same way as we have evolved over a number of decades, up to and beyond the Good Friday Agreement, I think that the whole issue of Irish unity will be an evolution. It'll not be a revolution, and in the way that we would have saw it, ideally happening in the 1970s and 80s. It will be an evolution that will look vastly different from our sort of wildest imaginations as young Republicans.
Well, let's talk about evolution in a personal kind of a way, because you're probably better known to a lot of people now, Tony, and certainly outside of this community as an author, as a memoirist. You've produced 3. And I talked to Susan McKay recently, and I mentioned her book. So I'm going to, in fairness, because we're all about fairness and all of that, in fairness, you have produced 3 memoirs. This Man's Wee Boy, The Dead Beside Us, and The Scalper and Me, which trace your own political evolution. And what kind of interests me, because a while ago you mentioned the atrocities that happened on, I'm going to say both sides. It's more than 2 sides in this. There were atrocities perpetrated by quite a number of actors in the conflict here. But you have moved personally, evolved from a young man who, I mean, perfectly understandably, in my opinion. I mean, you were 9 when Bloody Sunday happened, and your father was shot dead by a member of the parachute regiment. And at a young age, you would have been bent on the idea of revenge, like any young man in your circumstances would have been. You no longer feel like that. How did that happen? Why did that happen? What went on in the mind of Tony Doherty, who suffered so grievously in 1972?
Things evolve, I suppose. People evolve, and nothing stays the same. And I mean, I joined the IRA because of the tyranny of the state, of the northern state, and the connection with Britain. I didn't necessarily join it to unify the country. I think that was a wee bit down the pecking order. It was an act of vengeance, not just on my own behalf. I mean, you grew up in the same generation as myself. A lot of, when I went to prison in 1981, I was actually shocked by how many people told me, and not all people from Derry, that they had joined the IRA because of what happened on Bloody Sunday. And so I think there was a communal sort of sense of the need for revenge, and that was sort of personified in me because of my father was murdered on Bloody Sunday. So as I say, but nothing stays the same. I mean, I actually got out of prison a more convinced Irish Republican than I went in, because I spent all the time that I had, it was over 4 years, educating myself, becoming more politicized, learning the Irish language, which I think is a huge achievement, and I still reflect very, very positively on that. However, I think they see by probably, I mean, I got out of prison in 1985, and I would say by 2 or 3 years, hence it was clear to me that the conflict was going nowhere. And certainly by the early 1990s, I think a lot of people were questioning the morality of armed struggle, not in terms of the cause that you're fighting for, but whether you can actually achieve it through armed conflict, and whether you're conceivably doing more damage to your cause by armed conflict. I think a lot of people, again, I think it's a generational thing. I think a lot of people who were like Martin McGuinness, for instance, and this is a guess, I've never spoken to him about it, who were sort of coming of age in the early 1970s, and were, you know, possibly on the point of grandfatherhood in the 1990s, or who were certainly all parents. I think they started to reflect on things a bit differently than they did in the early 70s. So things evolve, things move on. I don't for a second regret joining the IRA. On balance, it was actually the right thing to do when you consider my own circumstances. But whether I would recommend it to the 14 or 15-year-old Tony Doherty now, might be you might get a different response. But it was a very, very difficult time. I think that the choices really at that time as well, and right throughout the 1970s, were, do you do something, or do you conceivably do nothing but get involved in nationalist politics? And I think for a lot of us growing up in the 1970s, becoming involved in nationalist or SDLP politics was completely anathema. It just didn't cut it at all. So I think a lot of people just didn't even see that as an alternative. They just saw the need for the taking violent action against the state, and that's the category I fall into.
Can I ask you about that? I mean, why, revenge kind of disappeared for you? What was that happened? I mean, I in my mind's eye, as I talk to you, I'm thinking about a person I know who is part of the unionist community, a woman whose husband was shot dead by the IRA in horrific circumstances. I could understand fully in her case. I can understand fully in your case why, having experienced what you and she did, you'd want to experience. You'd want to have revenge. I can understand that. What happened to you that made that go away for you? That meant you were no longer maybe driven by that. Were no longer driven by the need to achieve that or see that.
I just think it was an evolutionary thing. I think they have an objective of revenge. You have to have a deep hatred in your heart, and when I get further into my 20s, a fair bit, I sort of reflected on it and didn't feel the hatred anymore, and therefore, if I didn't have the hatred, how could I be up for sort of seeking revenge? Not that I don't think revenge is it's not a productive thing anyway. I mean, there's a Russian saying that if you seek revenge, you have to dig 2 graves. That's a very, very true saying. I mean, Soldier F killed my father, right? Murdered him, and there's nothing good about him whatsoever. He has probably been involved in a whole range of our atrocities since Bloody Sunday. I don't know, and I've no way of telling. Yeah, he's an evil wee man, but I don't think if he was in front of me now and I had a gun that I could kill him. So it doesn't really matter doesn't really matter to me. He doesn't matter to me. And at the end of the day, it's the person who kills the other person that really matters in terms of revenge. And what I felt when I was involved with ours in terms of setting up the Bloody Sunday campaign, that it wasn't really about revenge anymore. It was about putting history right. And for me, that was a far more noble goal and a far more achievable goal than seeking revenge against murderers and the employer of the state. I think that would just have gone round in a vicious circle. And in a sense, that's what drove the conflict for quite a lot of it. And I think it's for me, it just wasn't cutting it. So by about 1982, I had completely sort of revised my own sort of headspace and personal objectives, and revenge wasn't one of them.
Should at this point, Tony, in fairness, say that, I mean, Soldier F isn't here to defend himself and so on. So it's just important to place that in the record. We don't know what he has done subsequent to Bloody Sunday and all of that. Just I think it's important to point that out, you know. Although I understand why you feel the way you do about him, obviously. I'm wondering how you feel about, you know, we've talked about Brexit there. How would you feel about the prospect of a border poll now? Because we've seen in recent days what something like, from the nationalist point of view, something as harmless and as innocuous as Irish language legislation has sent some parts of unionism into paroxysms, you know, of panic or outrage or whatever. A border poll, I mean, you have to think, what would a border poll do in terms of destabilizing the political equilibrium? Is it a price worth paying, in your opinion? How quickly should it happen? How risky might it be?
Yeah, well, on a technicality, it's an accepted part of the Good Friday Agreement, and it's 50% plus one. But
yeah, but within the gift of a British secretary as to when it's called, you know.
Yeah.
And the secretary believe it's likely to be one as well.
Yeah, there probably should be. I mean, in much the same way as that there is pressure in Scotland for a second referendum, given the maybe not as much demography there, but sort of political opinion as expressed at the ballot box. Here, I think there is a growing realization that the northern state is failed, and the Good Friday Agreement has sort of put it on a life support machine. I mean, you can see that in terms of the executive, given it's supposed to be a partnership government, it practically is anything but a partnership government. It looks like just a whole series of siloed decisions that are sometimes gathered by the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister. So it's far from any sort of decent kind of government that will actually produce the goods for those in society that most need it. So there has to be some type of a mechanism for taking account of where political opinion is at with regard to the existence of the northern state and partition. I do think it should be again, even at it probably should be an evolutionary sort of process. I think I don't think anybody would recommend a sudden border poll. It probably needs to be carefully considered and carefully canvassed by our political leaders throughout the island and in Britain as well.
Give us a time scale. Give us a time scale there. What do you reckon?
There would need to be I think that it would be reasonable to hold a border poll within 3 years. I would have thought 5 years at the outside. I think that the next Stormont election will actually could well throw up a number of surprising results and probably reflect the fact that it's more and more clear that unionism doesn't actually hold the majority anymore. Reflected in the numbers of seats and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to happen, and I think that accounts for the sort of the panic that has set into the unionist parties 100 years since partition. I mean, both of them have gone through. I mean, on one hand, the Ulster Unionist Party can't really settle on a leader because nobody really wanted it until Doug Beattie came along, whereas in the DUP they can't settle on a leader because they're not sure how far to the right they shouldn't move, if you know what I mean. So I think that's causing all sorts of palpitations within unionism, and I think they probably have given it a good guess that that the partition game is up. It's just a matter of how long they can sit it out. And I think it's as rough and cut as that. And what they, I mean, I think that the Brexit vote, Paul, I think was the first chink in the armor of Ulster unionism, and that the statisticians obviously worked out that a significant section of the unionist population voted to maintain the union with Europe. I think that, in some respects, was a death knell for unionism, because I think business-minded middle classes will follow the money, which I think that they have every entitlement to do. And I think that Europe was a much more exciting prospect from a business point of view than the UK is. So I think you have all those manifestations all happening at the same time. It's not a good time to be unionist, and it's no surprise that the 100th birthday is practically it's practically impossible to celebrate. I think all those things are mitigating against the possibility of a 110th or 120th birthday. I think it's gone beyond the point where the centre can hold. I don't think the centre can hold anymore. It's tipping point. And I think the next election, and there could be one called within a matter of weeks, we don't know. But the next election, if it's not, will be next May.
I mean,
I think that will show up how good or bad it is for unionism, and I think my prediction will be that it won't be good. So
you mentioned the 100th, the birthday, just as a centenary thought. I'll share. I'm not going to ask you to comment on this because it's just a quote that some people will be familiar with. Across generations, the people of Northern Ireland are choosing to build an inclusive, prosperous and hopeful society, strengthened by the gains of the peace process. May this be our guiding thread in the coming years. It's a kind of, I would suggest, it's a kind of a wish that you might not distance yourself from. And those words were uttered by the Queen in a centenary message to the people of Northern Ireland. So it's quite a remarkable statement in a way, an endorsement of the the peace process and inclusivity and things like that. It's a kind of a remarkable kind of thing to say. And you mentioned Mark McGuinness earlier on, and he and the Queen. I mean, they kind of they reached out to one another.
Yeah.
And they have helped to take our society to a different place. So who knows what never mind the next 100 years, who knows what the next 10 years will bring.
I think the next 10 years will be a very interesting decade indeed for the issue of partition and relationship within the island and between this island and our near neighbour. So bring it on.
Okay. On that note, Tony Doherty, look, thanks a million for joining us on this series on the line with your perspective on partition. We're very grateful to you for sharing your views with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.